Okay. Just want to make sure everybody online can hear me, correct? If anybody can do a thumbs up. Janice, can you do a thumbs up for me? Okay. All right, good. Want to make sure everybody can hear me. All right. So let me go into screen show. Okay. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. And thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Eleanor Rangers. I'm the president of the Southeastern Pennsylvania Cold War Historical Society. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving history in the greater Philadelphia region associated with Cold War activities, which include the space race as well. I keep telling everybody every month, hey, we're going to be doing something to celebrate the 250th anniversary of America, and we are a nonprofit affiliate for the state of Pennsylvania. I am getting very close to to announce the endeavor that we are going to be embarking upon very soon. So be patient. It's coming. More details are coming very soon, and I think you'll be pretty excited about what we're planning. This is, of course, our History in Our Backyard lecture series, and this year we are attempting to do this both live for some of our programs in Warminster, Pennsylvania, as well as by webinar. And I'd also like to thank our hosts, the Fuge, the old Johnsville Centrifuge, and they graciously allow us use of their meeting facilities and audiovisual. So I am eternally grateful for that opportunity so we can hold these events in Warminster. And our event this evening is in what is known as the studio, which actually were offices in the centrifuge on the third floor, right off of the flight deck. But actually, there is an actual recording studio that is here on this floor. It is actually run by the building owner's brother, Jim Crivero, and he has worked with a number of recording artists. They've won an Emmy for something I know that they did here a couple of years ago. So it's a real legit recording studio. For those of you who need restrooms, they are located around the corner from the far wall, and you will see a men's and ladies' room around there if you need to utilize those. Want to also mention for those of you that are live here, there is a brewing company downstairs known as Tranquility. They have great food. They have great beer that they make themselves. So definitely would encourage you to check them out if you have a chance. And believe it or not, there is also a spa here in the building that I think is actually putting in a salt cave as well, I understand, to expand their offerings. So definitely check those out. They are on the first floor. We are a nonprofit organization, as you know. We certainly rely on the generosity of those who choose to donate to our organization. So for those of you who have donated to our organization, thank you. And if you choose to donate in the future, we thank you for that. So just want to make that mention. Another thing that we are working on is actually partnering with a local artist to assemble a coloring book of aircraft from the Naval Air Development Center. So he's about 2/3 of the way through in developing the coloring book, and we'll be offering that for a nominal fee, probably through Tranquility Brewing, and it'll be, I think, a nice little gift. We will partner that with a book that he actually illustrated as well, a coloring book on the space race that we actually unveiled last July during an event we did here at the centrifuge. So this will be the companion piece, and I am thinking of probably doing an additional volume of the larger story of aerospace heritage in the greater Philadelphia region. So more to come with that, but I think you'll really enjoy the NADC aircraft once we unveil that fairly soon. We also do keep our programs like this one that we record actually on our YouTube channel. Would definitely recommend you check that out. Not only do we house these previous lectures, but I do try to keep that site updated with other Cold War or space race related items that may be of interest. So definitely check that out periodically. And for those of you that are on the Facebook platform, we do maintain a Facebook page there as well, where I try to keep announcements of our programming here and sometimes some other Cold War or space race related items. So definitely worth checking that out as well. And also we do have a presence actually through one of the former employees at the Naval Air Development Center by the name of Doug Crompton. He actually has created a website or a page on MeWe, which is another social media platform. So if you are on the MeWe platform, definitely look for the NAWC site. We do run these programs now throughout the year, and I want to just call your attention to a couple of upcoming lectures. A couple of these are webinar only, but we do have a couple of live programs as well. June and July are going to be just webinar only. We have David Stumpf returning to talk about the evolution of the canister launch system for the Peacekeeper missile. Many of you who regularly attend our programs are familiar with David, who's given many lectures on the nuclear arsenal in the United States. So I'm sure there'll be another fascinating talk. And then we have Stephen Walker, who's spoken for us from the 2 past years, fabulous speaker from the UK. And he's going to be talking about Germain Titov, one of the early Russian cosmonauts. So I'm sure it will be a very entertaining talk, as his usually are. And then we're back for a live program in August with Gary Powers Jr., who many of you know or have recently toured with in Europe. And he will be back with another gentleman by the name of Chris Sturdivant, who spoke for this organization a couple of years ago. And they're going to be talking about a new book that they released called Cold War Virginia. So those are just a scattering of some of the upcoming programs for you to keep in mind. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our speaker this evening, Jim or James Sobek. And he is a senior accident analyst at Wolf Technical Services in Indianapolis, Indiana. Following high school graduation in 1960, Jim joined the Navy to get an education in electronics. He served for 3 years aboard the USS William V. Pratt which is a guided missile destroyer. His primary work there involved operation and maintenance of the Terrier missile guidance radars. His ship was part of the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis naval blockade. That's interesting, little factoid. After honorable discharge from the Navy in 1964, he enrolled in Thiel College in Greenville, Pennsylvania, and in 1968, he was awarded a Bachelor of Arts degree in physics. Jim also has additional training from UCLA and Purdue University. After graduation from Thiel, Jim was hired at the Naval Avionics Center in Indianapolis in the missile guidance branch. And for the next 20 years, most of his work was in developing an electro-optical missile guidance system known as the Digital Scene Matching Area Correlator, or DSMAC, is what I'm told you pronounce that. That ultimately became part of the guidance system for the Navy's Tomahawk cruise missile. So we're going to learn all about that this evening. He's a co-patent holder for DSMAC, and that was awarded for his development of much of the optical hardware and aerial image processing technology currently used in that system. And in 1981, Jim and 2 other men at the Naval Avionics Center were honored for their invention of that system. Jim left the Avionics Center in 1988, to take a second career with Wolf Technical Services, which is a forensics and design engineering firm in Indianapolis. And over the next 36 years, he analyzed personal injury and property damage accidents that involved optics, lighting, and visibility. And then finally, in 2007, Jim formed Clearly Visible Presentations, which is a company whose mission is to teach the principles and techniques of optics, lighting, visibility, and digital imaging to technical professionals worldwide. So quite an extensive resume. We are delighted to have Jim, who drove out from Indianapolis to be here this evening. And I'm going to hand over the microphone to Jim, and I will get his slides up and we'll give it a go. So Jim, welcome. Give us just a second here to adjust.
I will try standing for a while, but after 6.5 hours of driving, I'm not sure I want to all the time.
Is yours.
Very good. Thank you, Eleanor. I appreciate the introduction. As indicated, we're going to be talking about a system we call DSMAC. A lot of the press, when they have talked about it, they kind of fumble. They say DSMAC or DSMAC or whatever. It was originally called, well, I'll go into that. It was originally called SMAC when it was in the analog form. And when we digitized it with the advent of solid state TV and all the electronics of the 1980s, we called it DSMAC. Can I advance it? Apparently not. You're going to have to advance. There we go. Okay. So we're going to kind of cover this background going from what are missiles and rockets all the way through to the operational history of the system. And by the way, can you have people confirm that they can hear me?
Yes, I can see your audio.
Okay, very good. So what is a missile? Well, it's anything that we throw through the air, whether it's David and Goliath or whether or not it's a rocket or pitch a Bible at somebody. They're all missiles in the end. The missiles that we're going to work with, actually, you might think of them as rockets. But a rocket is anything that has an internally contained engine, and that can go from anything on the ground. We see the Houthis over in the Middle East using rockets all the time and dumping rockets into places. Flares, that's if you were in the military, you know about flares. They launch them up and they are a rocket. And then finally, objects in space that have powered systems, whether or not it's on its way to Pluto or beyond, and only a few dynes of generating force, or if we're talking about the space shuttle being launched. There are several kinds of missiles that I've worked on some of these. When I was in the Navy, aboard ship, I worked surface to air. I was involved with the Terrier, part of the Terrible T system, Tartar, Terrier, and Talos. And our ship was a guided missile cruiser. That kind of led me to getting back to it when I got out of the Navy and finished college. The bottom line is what we're going to be using here is the cruise missile. And what that means is a missile that remains in the atmosphere, travels the great majority of its path at more or less constant velocity. This cruise missile.
Excuse me, your screen is not changing. All we're seeing is your bio.
Aha.
Thank you. Can you go back to your starting slides too, please?
Sure.
And it looks like it's working now. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for letting us know.
Thanks, Eleanor.
Which slide?
Start at the this one. So as I said earlier with the audio portion, we will be covering the principles of missiles and rockets, and we're going to talk about the mission for the Tomahawk system, the design principles that got done in making this system actually be born and function. And we'll take it through IOC and out to the operational history. And I will point out, maybe later also, that I've been paying close attention to the news the last few days, and we're still dumping Tomahawks over in the Middle East. Apparently, the Houthis have been on the pointy end of some of the Tomahawks in the last 2 or 3 weeks. I don't have a lot of contact with the program anymore, but anytime somebody says Tomahawk, my ears perk up. A missile is anything that is thrown or propelled toward a target. It could be a rock like David and Goliath here. It could be a hand. It could be my remote. I can pitch this out here. It functions as a missile. Or it can be something that you eject from a gun barrel, for example, whether it's a 38 caliber gun or a 155 millimeter large gun for the military. rockets are just thrown and they don't have any propulsion. Once it leaves David's sling, it's all gravity and air resistance. Whereas a rocket has power on board, and that power may be only momentary, like when we launch the space shuttle and the Atlas rockets. They fire for a long period of time, and then they coast for a while, and then they fire up again. With the SpaceX's Starship program, they have learned how to burn their rockets for several minutes while they're heading out to orbit. All the various kinds of missiles that you are typically seen in the military, we go from surface to surface. The Army has a number of those, from air to surface. Hellfire missile is an air to surface, fired generally from helicopters. Surface to air is like my Terrier, Talos, and Tartar, the terrible T system. And then you've got sidewinders like air-to-air missiles, and you've got ballistics where you throw them from Russia and they land all the way on the other side of the world. And basically, they're just gravitational. Now, they do steer in the end. But finally, we're going to talk about a cruise missile. And a cruise missile is a guided missile. We're talking about the guidance system that typically is used against terrestrial targets and ships. There are now ship versions. And it remains in the atmosphere, so it's an air breather. And we'll talk about that air breather because down here on the bottom, you will see this is the air intake for this engine here. It flies the majority of its mission at more or less a constant speed. On this particular missile, it is submarine launched or surface ship launched. Here we have a submarine that pops out a torpedo functionally because it fits in the exact same torpedo tubes as the Mark 38 torpedo. And once it gets airborne, it then becomes an airplane. It turns on an engine, it extends its wings and flies like an airplane. But it's truly is a UAV system. The overall mission looks like what we have up here. We can attack both day and night. And pretty decent weather conditions, snow covered on the ground or not. I don't know that we've ever prepared a mission that's going to go through a thunderstorm or a tornado, but they're hard enough to predict, so you're probably not going to be able to do that anyway. The mission planning is often done at a mission planning center. Excuse me. I did mission planning at Camp Smith in Hawaii, at Norfolk Naval Station, and at Arlington, Virginia, where there was a mission planning center there. I trained the mission planners of how to select the scenes, what they needed to get in the way of information. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Then you've got the launch platform, which is either a surface ship or a submarine. There was a variant which the START program gave away that was going to be ground launched. It was going to be what's called the GLICM, ground carrier launched missile, but you could also put it on a truck. It was going to be nuclear. And as we were doing the SALT talks, we gave up the nuclear option. And I'll talk about that a little bit because it was ultimately, in my opinion, because of the DSMAC system and the Tomahawk that we could give up that nuke because we were powerful enough that we could fly it through, pick the window here, that window or this window or this window. So you know you're getting the target, the explosive where you want, and all you need is 1,000 pounds of high explosive as opposed to a nuke to take out 15 or 20 miles. Once you've got it launched, it goes into navigation, and we'll discuss that at more length. It's in first initial, and I'm sure that some of you knew the inertial work that was going on here with the Keynes program and the S3 program, a bunch of the aircraft that you guys worked on at NADC. Then there is a terrain contour matching system, which is a radar that looks at the ground and builds a profile of what the ground looks like as the missile flies along. So we're talking about he gets on land and now he's flying over hilltops. And the shape of that ground is measured with a radar and compared with a pre-stored map of the whole area of the ground and says, oh, I recognize that. That's right where we're going over the, say, the Ohio River. And so we're terrain contour matching. But then after we've done that, if we had a nuclear missile, we might just turn left and go to the target and blow the hell out of the whole target. But if not, we then go into a terminal phase, and now we have what are called DSMAC scenes, and they are pictures of the ground that are pre-stored, and our system photographs the ground, compares them with what it had pre-stored, and determines where it is within those individual scenes, sends that data back to the inertial navigator. The inertial navigator updates its common filter and says, oh, okay, I thought I was right down the center, but apparently I was off to the left a little bit. I'll adjust my drift rates. And we do that again and again until we actually get to the target. At this point, having completed, say, 3 DSMAC maps, now the missile flies entirely inertial on its way to the target. It knows where the target is. Functionally, it closes its eyes and just goes to where the target is. Sometimes it pops up and goes down. Other times it drops down and goes through the side of the building. And we're dead again, Eleanor. Okay. So as I mentioned, we have submarine launch or we have launch from a surface ship these days. We don't have any ground launch capability that we are actually producing. When the missile gets sent out of the submarine, it is a torpedo because it fits in that Mark 38 torpedo tube. There's no rocket, no jet engine yet. It's just a rocket with solid state fuel, and it launches, and the first thing it does as soon as it pops out of the water is it...
Anybody else? November 1, Delta Radio, Sierra N1 DRS, 15 miles south of Boston.
Victor Alpha 3, November, United Kingdom.
Okay, Victor United 3.
That's not me.
Tango. Dave, how are you? Nice call, by the way. You're 5 and 9 in the Mike Alpha there. Oh?
That's a radar, that's a tower. Philadelphia Tower. Okay.
Dan, we muted you. We didn't need to be listening to PHL.
There we go. I think you're running your mouse, yeah. The air intake will pop down here. This booster will drop off, fall in the ocean. And now it is a jet engine. It's a Williams, and I don't remember their model number, but it's a very nice, very small engine. Probably would fit on 2 of these chairs, maybe, well, it's got to be 28 inches or less in diameter, and runs on what's called dimer fuel. Once it has gotten the wings extended and the fins deployed, then it goes into a flight mode basically driven by the mission planning system. It may go to a high altitude, it may skim the water, but whatever the mission planners have told it that it's going to do, it will now pick that up. And that's operated by what's called the CMGS, or the Cruise Missile Guidance System computer. I'm going to give this up and you do it. Okay. Inertial navigation, basically, I'm sure most of you know about this, but maybe the people online don't. It consists of some accelerometers, some gyroscopes, angle rate sensors, and some software. It's the same thing that you would do if you decided you were going to go someplace in a car and you're going to go as the passenger. You put a mask over your eyes, you sit in the car, you hear the driver turn the engine on, you feel the driver back up, you feel them turn left, you feel them accelerate. You are literally sensing by the seat of your pants and your arms and the semicircular canals in your ears. The same thing is going on with the inertial navigation system. It's sensing the acceleration of the missile. If there is no acceleration, then it assumes that since the acceleration is 0, it must be going at a constant rate. There may be a drift, though, in some of those sensors that even though they are declaring or should be declaring that it's undergoing 0 acceleration or 0 angular rate, there may be a small amount of output that is wrong. All of this information goes into the navigation software and is a system called the Kalman filter, Kalman. It's a statistical set of programs that generally have 15 or 20 various states. So it knows the X, Y, and Z of the missile. It knows the pitch, angle, and yaw of the missile. It knows the speed of the missile. It knows the angular rates, rotation, elevation change. All that stuff is constantly being mapped and updated when it gets outside information. So we've been flying under inertial nav for maybe the better part of a half an hour. Maybe we were well out in the ocean and we launched from a submarine and it goes low. It is using its radar altimeter to stay from pitching into the water, but it knows that it's 25 or 30 feet off the water and it's heading toward the coast of, say, Yemen. When it gets to the coast, then it turns on the radar, puts it into a different mode, and begins to collect data. This is the radar data here. And so we got height measurements from the ground. We have a pre-stored image. This is the reference area that we know we're going to fly over that sometime. We're going to approach the coast of Yemen, and we know that we won't be more than, say, 5 miles to the east or 5 miles to the west. Actually, with Yemen is north and south, I think. As we fly over those, the computer generates a map here and compares it with this and ultimately finds out that it must be going roughly down the center, and it in real time knows where it is and reports that to the cruise missile guidance set computer. It says, you just passed over the center of map 1. You were late about a quarter of a second. You were 150 feet to the right. Put those into your guidance solution, update it, we'll do it again. So maybe we take 2 or 3 TERCAM runs. This data for the maps is called DTED, Digital Terrain Elevation Data. It's prepared, at least it was when I was in the program, it's prepared by the Defense Mapping Agency over in St. Louis, down on the river. If you've ever been to the Breadweiser Brewery on the Mississippi River, you go through the brewery property, it's on both sides, drive down a hill, and there's a big old brick building like that on the right-hand side, and that's where they prepare all that stuff. The imagery comes from reconnaissance aircraft. I didn't used to be able to legally say that it comes from satellites, but that's been declassified, and I think we all figured that out anyway. So it's mostly satellite data, but it doesn't have to be. We have excellent aerial photography for much of the world, and you've seen it all published by Google. They're putting it all out there, and you can use Google to prepare a terrain elevation data map. After we've done the TERCOM and we've got the inertial navigation system leashed as well as we possibly can, when we get near the target, and we know that in the mission planning, we know that the target is somewhere down in here. And so mission planners select pictures of the terrain from their aerial imagery that have the proper characteristics. I will get into it a little bit later, but the proper characteristics that we first started with were bushes in the Southwest desert, mesquite bushes and just stuff on the ground. And as it turned out, as I will point out, we could have attacked the hell out of the Southwest Texas in the 1970s and 1980s. I didn't think, I was worried that maybe if we got to a real world war, that might be a problem. But as it turned out, Iraq looks exactly like it. So we fly several of those. And again, we now set them up and fly this one first, taking a series of pictures. You see the little boxes, snapping off pictures. This one is inside of the reference map. This one is out again. And then we fly over here and do this. And at the end of each one of these, we look to see what the best match was of all of these images and report that data to the cruise missile guidance set computer. And then we fly through the next scene. Update the software, do it again. And after 3 or 4 or 5 scenes, which is selected during the mission planning process, then we declare that we know exactly where we are and we know where we're going, and we functionally just close our eyes and go inertial only. The DSMAC scenes essentially look like these digital images down here. They were originally a photograph, but we turn them into a binary or binarized image where the blacks are really black and the whites are totally clear and the edges are sharp. And that image processing maximizes the sharpness of the correlation peak. So this is a slide in the days of our analog system. We proposed that we were going to have a film drum up here that was spinning around like this while the missile or the aircraft was going in this direction. And this cylinder was an image intensifier. The first ones were about 7 inches long, 1.5 inches, 2 inches wide. They were called a photo multiplier tube. And you put like 10,000 volts on the input screen and you would get a pretty decent picture on the outside. Because these images are the exact negative of the ground image. If the ground is a dark looking bush, then on that reference image, the image will be a negative, it'll be white. Anything that is gray is chosen to either get rid of the gray and make it black or make it white. That's part of the image processing software. The missile is flying through this entire reference area, taking pictures or looking at the ground here because this was not digital. It was just this piece of film spinning. And I'll demonstrate that in a little bit because I've got one of the devices here. We thought we were going to be flying down here on the nominal flight path. But as the process of doing the correlation happens, we find out that we were right of center. So we report these values, we report the best, and ultimately in the DSMAC that we now use, we report the last best correlation. So if we have 2 of them that both correlated at 85.7%, we'll take the last of those 2 85.7 reports, figuring that it is more up to date. So this is the film version, and this is a mathematical representation of that at the bottom, where we have a reference image on the ground, so that's the desert below. We put that imagery through a lens, project it onto an image intensifier, the photomultiplier tube, take this information out, and now it's just a single voltage. We're not talking about numerical values of correlation. It is just a voltage that goes from 0 to say 10, and we look for the best match. Or in this case of this one, since we're using a negative, we look for where the image goes dark, completely dark, momentarily. Then we put that through a bandpass filter, and we thresholded it here, and ultimately report that information off to the cruise missile guidance set. When this slide was prepared, we weren't part of the cruise missile program. We were just a guidance concept looking for an airframe to be in. So we were testing this in our lab and putting up pretty pictures, and we actually made foam terrain models. We actually poured a whole bunch of foam. We had made a model that was about as long as the table here that Eleanor is behind, and about 4 feet wide. And it was a picture of, made up picture of Vietnam, because Vietnam was when we first were doing this work. So we put bridges in there. We went out and bought model planes from Naval Corporation, if any of you have made models, and took missiles off those and airplanes. And I made a bridge out of brass rod. And ultimately, we were able to demonstrate that it was going to work with this. The basic idea is that in the digital form, you take a series of pictures, and I will tell you that it's fast. I'm not going to give you the actual numerical value because that may still be classified. But if you think of a camera that is flying over the ground and it goes, it's about that fast. And at every one of these, then it is taking a photograph of the ground. The missile is flying in this direction as the green arrow is indicated, and its first picture is there. And then as the ground moves back behind it, the next picture is here, and then it's finally here. We're about to fly off out of the reference scene. But the picture, once we extract it, looks like this, like that, and you see that they're all exactly the same image. I selected this one because of this cross-shaped bush. That was seen too at White Sands Missile Range when we were doing our final testing. We had 4 scenes at that. None of the rest of them were actually identifiable. I had to look at them and say, that's the target. Tell a surveyor. I went out in the desert and we put a flag down there and said, survey this and tell us where it is in latitude, longitude mode. I'll get to it a little bit later. Turns out they weren't quite as good as they told us they were. We started with 3 different drums, and I'll stop here for a moment and just show you this. I think I can show it to the camera too. Are you able to see that? Or is the camera looking at you?
I don't have the camera
Okay.
visible right now.
This is the version of a 3-inch drum. It's screwed down by a big nut and take it all the way off. Really fine for that. And now pull this out, and you'll see that there is a strip of film in there, black and white film. It's Mylar, it's a graphic arts film, and it has very high contrast. And I made these in our photo lab. And if I got one big, it was 9 inches long, because the diameter of the circumference plus a little bit. I took a small dab of super, put it on the ends, after I put it on these pins that hold it on, and hopefully it will stick the finish.
Can you use the microphone? People can't hear you
Oh,
well.
yeah. I'm sorry. So I made the film strips in our photo lab and assembled them myself. And they were made, in this case, when you look at them, you will see that there are 4 copies of the same image. So there's a total of 12 images all the way around here. In fact, if you want, I'm not going to handle that much. That's the actual strip that was flown in January 29th of 1977, our first totally successful analog SMAC flight. And that's the same as this one that I've shown you here, just installed. So this thing spun at about 400 RPM, just spinning around there. And a lens is projecting an image onto a 4-quadrant sensor here. In the earlier version that I showed with the drawing, we actually had a photo multiplier tube, which was that PMT. But as we got down to the 3-inch drum, technology was coming along, and we could now get silicon 4-quadrant detectors, and we were able to extract more information out of the correlation, because now we can have the right half and the left half, and the top half and the bottom half, and the top right and the bottom left. So it ended up being very useful. This is the actual system that flew on January 29th of 1977. This lens, as it turns out, we needed a lens. We knew that we needed a zoom lens because we had to correct for variations in the elevation of the missile. So I went to Ingenue Corporation out of France. I had been watching the Apollo landings, and they had a video camera on the moon taking pictures. I said, what lens did you guys use there? It was an 8x8 made by Ingenue. We went to Ingenue and bought several of them and installed those to start. But we didn't need 8x8. We only needed a 2-to-1 zoom lens. Nobody is going to make 2-to-1 zoom lenses because there's no interest. They were all pushing it 2-to-1, 4-to-1, 8-to-1, 16-to-1. I have a camera right now that is 57-to-1, both electronic and optical. So the drum is spinning, and you see the image there. This whole drum is spinning clockwise, and the light is passing through here from the ground. So down is to the right in this image. The image of the ground is projected on here. It passes through the film, and if we've done a good job, every bush on the ground matches the negative image on the piece of film. And at the moment of correlation, the light goes to 0 and then pops back up. At the rest of the time, the light's going up and down slowly, but right at the moment of correlation, it is an extremely sharp peak. It forms what's known mathematically as a cusp. And we can filter for that cusp. And when we see that, we report the time and the position on this drum. You will notice that there are pins here, and there are more around the side. Those pins hold the piece of film, but there are also pins on the top here. These are magnetic pins, and down on the side over, and I think it's over here, there is a small magnetic sensor. And so as one of these pins passes by, it's got a point on the end of it. And as it passes by, there's a glitch momentarily that when it's gone by here. We had 6 of those pins plus 1. The plus 1 was put in about 10 degrees beyond number 1 so that we knew where we were in the overall cycle. So then the way we prepared the images, when we first did this work out at White Sands Missile Range, we hired a aerial photography company called Cooper Aerial Industries, and they took these photographs. This photograph is a 9x9 picture. They took them at a particular known elevation with a known focal length lens, and so I knew what the scale factor on each of these parts of the film were. And this is pretty flat terrain. And what I then ended up doing was selecting some portion of this picture that looked entirely unique. No other place in the entire universe did that particular, for example, that square cross-shaped bush. It doesn't matter what planet you're on, that pattern does not exist anyplace else. So this is entirely unique. We select 4 scenes in this case. I used a Durst G139 enlarger, which was a really, excuse the French, a big ass enlarger. It had a table that was this large, had calibrated lenses on it, and so I knew that I was producing exactly the scale factor that I needed. We used a technique called unsharp masking. You can look it up. I'm not going to go into what it does right now, but basically it throws out the big features that you see in here. This dark area up here, it contains no useful information when you're just looking at a small box, maybe this big. So we are able to magically put a piece of opal glass in there, project through that, and make a mask, and then subtract that mask out so that all we got were extremely high contrast images of the bushes on the ground in this case. Now, they wouldn't be bushes if we're here in Philadelphia. They would be homes, they would be streets, they would be other things. Typically things the size of the tables here, or maybe smaller, and because we're only flying at low altitudes. And so we can see things that you could see if you were flying in your local aircraft at, say, 100 feet, 200 feet with your own eyes. Those are the kinds of scenes we're looking at. We used what was called a step and repeat machine to print these precisely on this surface with a given offset, so that I wanted to offset them up a little bit or down a little bit, and I was working with 1/10,000th of an inch capability to step these up and down. You will see that the same image occurs 1, 2, 3, and 4 times, or no, 3 times here. So there are 12 images, a group of 4. So this one here, 1, 2, and 3. This one is 1, 2, and 3, and so on. So as those are spinning around, you actually get 3 correlations for every rotation of the drum. Ultimately, using basic photographic chemistry, I put them into a developer. I pulled them out and put them in a stop bath. I washed them, I dried them, and I installed them in the DSMAC drum. Once we had this understood, we sent it down to the photo lab. We had a large photo lab on our campus, and gave them the instructions, and gave them the equipment, and said, we want you to prepare these strips for us. I'll just give you the images, and you put them on here in the fashion that I'm telling you. They never could get it right. The images had come back, and nominally they sent the same image back on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And on Monday it was different than Tuesday. On Wednesday it was different than Thursday. And not so much the positioning. The position was correct, but the development was just awful. I went down to the photo lab one day and I said, just out of curiosity, I'd like to see how the strips go through your developing machine, because it was capable of producing prints that were 4 feet by 4 feet. They pulled off the cover, and this is what I saw inside. There were stalactites there. They never changed the chemistry. They just added more chemistry. Each day they would put some in, and it kept on getting more and more concentrated. I looked at it and I thought, they have no idea what they're doing, and I haven't got the time to teach them. So I set my own photo lab up on the 3rd floor of our building and took on the whole process myself. Well, early on, I learned an awful lot about black and white photography. I had known a great deal about it when I was 10 years old. I learned how to take pictures. I learned how to develop the prints in or a film in a drum and print them on a print plate. But I learned that there was a hell of a lot more that I needed to know if I was going to be able to reproduce everything every time. All of these factors, all of this equipment, and turns out the water temperature was varying, because in August you can't get water that is colder than 85 degrees. As it comes out of the tap, it's 85 degrees Fahrenheit. In the wintertime, it's typically around 55, because it's stored in a water tower down at 10th and Arlington, about a mile from where our plant was. So I needed to somehow control the water temperature. I tried installing a water cooler up in a photo lab to get it down to, say, 55 or 60 degrees. Couldn't maintain it still, because it would warm up. Once I would put it in a tray, it would warm up over the next half an hour. And so I couldn't get any kind of control. So I was really very frustrated, and I'm thinking, we're going to have a hard problem here. Well, I went to the dentist one day. It turns out my daughter was a dental assistant at the office that I would go to. And they took x-rays that day. If you've had x-rays, you know there's a little bite wing, and now it's done electronically, but then it was a piece of film. She took the bite wing pictures and walked out, came back about 5 minutes later, and the images were done. I said, Kathy, where did you get those developed that fast? She says, we got a machine in the back. Really? Because the films were 35 millimeters wide, exactly the size we needed. I said, show me. So she took me back, showed me the tabletop processor, and I thought, this is the solution. So we went out and I had to convince my division manager that I wanted a tabletop processor like they used at the dental office. And he fought me for about 2 months. And finally I said, Wendell, if you don't buy it, Tomahawk program's dead. I'm not sure if it would, but I said, you want to be responsible? You won't spend $5,000? So he bought it, and within a week, I was in control completely, because the temperature inside of the individual trays, which were these little boxes right here, was 95 degrees. There were rollers that sent the film through. The whole thing was self-heated, and he put a piece of film in the left-hand end, and it came out in the right-hand end in about 2 minutes and 18 seconds. And you put in 50 strips, and they all came out exactly the same. So I was in control now. This is the ground scene. In fact, this is that one that I showed you, the cross-shaped bush. You don't really see that it's cross-shaped from the ground, but we sent surveyors out here, and they marked the location of this pole, which I declared was the center. And the surveyors were working with a company or an organization over in St. Louis. I mentioned it before. the Defense Mapping Agency. Well, the Defense Mapping Agency, DMA, has a group nation or worldwide, I think, called the Hydrographic and Topographic Center. And when I talked with them and said, I need very accurate surveys, how accurate can you get? They said, we can give you a half an inch on 20 miles. And we have survey units on the top of the mountains down here. So you tell us where the scenes are and we will survey them in and you can use that data. Well, they did a good job. And we got dimensions on the 4 scenes and we began to use them and fly them. Well, the first thing is when you're at 500 feet up, you can't tell where that bush is. So we needed something that the pilots could at least fly toward and know where they were going. So we ended up putting orange nets out there, like the construction nets that you see around ditches. So you don't want people to fall in. And we put poles on them too. And once we had that, the pilots could see where they're going. And we began to do flight testing. Well, this was in November of '76. Nothing was happening on the first 6 passes. I was busy adjusting the equipment, sitting in the back of the airplane. And basically, I'm sitting back there, kind of like this, with a scope between my legs, a logbook over here, and my co-worker right alongside of me. And we're flying in that direction. And we're flying low in August, September, and October. And the thermals out there are atrocious. At 50 feet, 100 feet up, it's bumpy. Well, you can get airsick that way. So on past November 24th, we hadn't had any success up until that day. But finally, the pilots could see where they were going, and we got a correlation on the scope and recorded the values in our equipment on pass number 7. And I said, go around again, do exactly the same thing. So they went around again and kept on turning, and it was getting hot, maybe 100 degrees inside of the airplane. And I ended up getting airsick. Reached over, grabbed a barf bag, filled it, went back to looking at the scope again. The air crew said, you want to go home? I said, no. And so we continued until past 25 when the pilot told me, we're going home because you're making me sick up here. But at that point, we now had a system that was working properly. We were able to analyze the data. And Admiral Walter Locke had told us that we needed a mission in hand because he was going to fly the Tomahawk airframe number 10 at the end of December of 1976. And he told us, you guys, if you get this on there and it works, you got a home in the cruise missile. If you don't, you've been telling me about this for years. I don't want to ever hear about you again. So the pressure was on for us. But there was a problem. As we were doing these testing, every time we passed through over the target and the later scenes, we were always off to the right or to the left, depending on which scene it was. Maybe 5 feet off, maybe 10 feet off the other way. And over the target, we were probably about 15 feet early. We reported that we were over the target, but we weren't there yet. So several of us at the plant began to study this and figure out, well, what's causing this? And we went through all of this stuff. I looked at all the scenes, proved that I had marked them all correctly. And finally, one of my coworkers in the neighboring branch said, I think that the survey data is wrong. I said, oh no, HTC says that they are right on. They've got it dead on. He said, that's the only thing that makes sense. So I thought, you're right, John. Okay, so I got on the phone, I called HTC. We couldn't talk about it on the phone because it wasn't a secure line, but I said, you've got an error. We think there's an error in your data. And it's this much on scene 2, it's this much on scene 3, it's this much on scene 4, and on the target. I don't think so. About 3 weeks later, they called me back. Hey, this is HTC. You could hear them shuffling their feet on the phone. How did you know? What? That there was an error in the scene positions. It's the only thing that made sense. I couldn't tell him everything on the phone. He said, well, you were right. And he gave us the new values. We put the new values in, reran the mission, and we were dead on, right over the target every time. So we learned a lesson to trust the data as much as you can, but if you can't, verify, like Reagan said. So on December 15th of 1970, is that the right date? 15. It should be a 78. That's wrong. It's got to be 78. He had told us, do it right or you're out of here. Well, we did 8 passes on that day with the entire mission, and it all worked perfectly. And I'll let you infer what this means. Our guy in the navigator's seat was really pleased with the results. We sent the mission information off to Point Mugu in California. They installed it in the missile, and they flew. Well, at that evening, we all went to Catalan's, which is a really nice steakhouse out in the east side of El Paso, where we were flying. But on January 29th of 1977, so that would have been 76. Maybe that was a 6. That must be a 6 there. I just can't see the top of it. On January 29th, they launched Airframe 10, and it was known as T-10-3 because it's the 3rd flight of Airframe number 10. They carried the missile to White Sands from Point Mugu in California. When they got over White Sands range where it was safe to do so, they dropped the missile. Once they established it, they did 2 passes under the wing of the missile. So the missile is flying the airplane, essentially, directing where the airplane goes. After they had 2 scenes, or 2 missions worked fine, he dropped the missile, and we ended up getting 2 captive passes, and then 5 passes of the missile afterward. I was at White Sands, and a personal story, some of you have probably been in these situations. We've all seen the moonshots and Starship and all that, where you've got people sitting at their monitors, monitoring each period of data. There were all of them out here at White Sands. There must have been 25 or 30 monitors, and I'm thinking, this is cool. This is really cool. Well, what I was doing is we had a pen plotter with water-based pens that would follow the path of the missile as it flew around the area. First pass, right over the target, because we knew where the target was. The guy who was running the pen plotter said, "Are you going to run another pass?" I said, "Yeah, we're going to do 5. "Oh, well, I'm going to have to change pens." So he took the red pen out and he put a green pen in, and it ran right on top of the red, right on the green. So it was perfect. It just was a black line now. After pass 5, he said, "Are you going to run again?" I said, "No, we're done." He said, "Good, because we're wearing a hole through the paper. The center peanut-shaped paper would have just fallen out because we were running exactly the same path every time." So we knew we had it functioning, and we now had a place on the missile. And Admiral Locke told us to get started with mission planning. But there's a problem. You got a piece of film. You've got to open up the missile, stick that piece of film in that drum, close it back together. You can't do that on a submarine when it's time for the balloon to go up. You've got to have some other form. So we continued flying again. Now we're out at Dugway Proving Grounds, and we made a mission where we came through from here and took fixes here, 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 and then flew down this runway. And there was a pair of film cameras at the base looking up at the aircraft as it came over the top. The guy from Dugway Proving Grounds was running the cameras, and he said, "I would like to have your help if you can. You need to turn the camera on." Well, okay, I can do that. I said, "When?" He said, 15 seconds before the missile gets here. I asked him why. He said, "Because the film's got to speed up. The roll is turning. It's 3,600 frames per second on rolls of film that are probably 3 feet in diameter. So this thing is slowly getting up to speed, not unlike the fuge spinning up." So we ran that. On that particular flight, I was actually on the ground. And what I wanted to do is I want to observe what the missile looked like. It's all about observables. You don't want your missile to stand out to the bad guys. They were flying 2 chase planes, an F-4 and an A-6. I knew that they were dropping it from the A-6. So they did the drop, and now there's these 3 airframes flying, and I'm over here at this site with one of the 2 cameras, and I'm looking this way, and I had a stopwatch. I started the stopwatch when I could see the 2 aircraft, but I couldn't yet see the missile. And then I hit another button on the stopwatch when I could see the missile, and I said, am I free to leave now? And he said, yeah, just turn the switch on. So I turn the switch on, the camera spins up, the missile comes right over the top of the runway, except that I had to run 10 feet to the left-hand side in order to be right under the missile, which is only 50 feet over my head at that time. It was pretty cool, except that I'm standing down there and this thing's coming and it goes in and it starts at 300 feet and then drops down to 200 feet and then drops down to 100 for the last scene, and then it drops down to 50. And I'm thinking, what happens if that doesn't quit dropping down? I'm toast. So I said, well, I'll jump behind the concrete base of the camera, but it stopped and it went over and we were only off by about 10 feet. But as it turns out, I've thought about this just recently. I think we had the same HTC errors in this scene that we had at White Sands. So now we had a good flight. This was in preparation for, how many of you have seen Tom Cruise in Maverick, the last movie? You remember when they're flying down the runway at the end and the Tomahawks have been launched and they're all going down the runway? This was that mission. You would fly down this runway, and as you got over about here, you began to launch out submunitions that popped out the top of the airframe, went ballistic, and then they had a small parachute, which is called a balloon, and it would pop out, and now the submunitions would fall nose first, and they hit the ground. Well, on this, they just had dye in them. They were done. In fact, they didn't have it in this first flight. They didn't even have the submunitions. We just knew that we had been successful. When they ran the next flight in 78, they now put submunitions in them, but not explosives. They just put red dye in them, dye powder. And now, instead of having just one forward-looking camera on the fin, they also had one looking rearward. And as these submunitions came out, they all fell on the runway and boom, 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 red dye all the way. So we knew we had a good system. But as I said, it's still a problem because you got to load the film. And that's just not tactically and strategically what you want. So this is the actual run. It came down right about here. I was standing on this camera. I ran out there and it went right over the top of my head. So we now had success. We knew that the object correlation was a viable way of steering a missile, but we were told by DARPA, I'm going to give you some money from DARPA, and we want you to turn this into a digital system. So we put TV cameras on it. We digitized the images, and now we had a system. Instead of being SMAC, it was now DSMAC. SMAC was Scene Matching Area Correlator. It had been a whole bunch of different names. It first started as the optical correlator. Then somebody decided they would call it the film drum scanner. But then somebody else realized that film drum scanner abbreviated to FDS, the feminine deodorant spray. So we dropped that. Then we went to SMAC, and somebody said, you don't want that because that's the name of street heroin. We said, screw it, we're sticking with it. So it was SMAC, and then when it went digital, it became DSMAC. When we were given the approval to do that, we went into my boss's office. He had a 2-foot by 3-foot green board. Some of you remember the green boards. We designed the entire DSMAC system, emulating what was taking place in the analog with the film drum, but we had to do it on 2 screens. So we filled up one green board. I took a Polaroid photograph of it. We wiped it all off and we filled it again. And on those 2 days, we designed the DSMAC. Not sure what happened there. Okay. Want to advance me, please? Okay, this is the way it operates. This is a video showing the DSMAC flying over a scene. This is in Wellsville, New York, where I grew up. Early Street is one of the main streets there. The box shows the reference area, and the missile flies through there and taking pictures at every one of those green boxes. Stores those pictures between each picture. It puts a picture that is taken up at the upper left-hand corner of the image and registers it with the background image, the stored reference. So it moves across and it's looking for a local minimum, and it doesn't find one on this first run. I could bore you and run every one of these runs. So I went down to the middle, and on this one, you'll see that it goes black right there. And then it goes on, and it recorded that that was a correlation point. It completes the entire map. All of this process is done in about 1/10 of a second. The whole matching process, taking the picture, matching it, and report it in about 1/10 of a second. So here I'm showing what happens when you have a perfect match. The image is rotated exactly the way it should be. It gets really dark, and that is a match point. But what if the missile is rotated a little bit to the right or to the left, or is scaled a little bit large or small? Well, the same process goes through here. And now I've rotated the image a little bit, and you'll see that the dark point starts in the upper left and goes to the lower right. So that gives me some information of the 4 quadrants that I've got a rotation error. I'm going to skip ahead on this because it's taking more time than I want, but we also checked for scale. And in the end, it's very, very reliable. And so we had built a digital system that completely emulated the film drone scanner. One of my coworkers, one of the inventors, wanted to go to infrared, and I said, absolutely not. We know what the world looks like in the visual domain. We don't know what the world looks like completely in the infrared domain. So I had to fight about that. So we stuck with digital ultimately. And even today, it's still visual. Okay. By December of 1980, we had a design and we needed a zoom lens now. You'll remember that I had a zoom lens that was from Ingenue, the one they used on the Apollo programs. Couldn't buy those. We really needed a 2-to-1, but I went to the back of our shop and there were some video cameras back there. And those video cameras were Sony, and they were 1/2-inch reel-to-reel video cameras. And they had a 4-to-1 Canon zoom lens on them. And I thought, those are common. I can use those. So I stripped off that lens. I found several more within the plant and decided we're going to work with the 4-to-1 Canon lens. Now, they weren't qualified for shake and bake for a cruise missile, but they worked. I called Canon and said, I need more of your 4-to-1 zoom lenses. Oh, we don't make that anymore. Well, can you make them? Yeah, we can open the line again. How many do you need? I said, 2,000. We're not opening the line unless we have at least 100,000 buy. So we couldn't do that. Ultimately, we ended up having a company out in Chicago make the lens. They cost $2,000, but it's Chicago Aerial Industries. Those of you who saw the movie Bridge of Spies saw them looking at the cameras. Those were CAI's cameras there. They're very good people. Ultimately, I thought we need these lenses. We can't wait until CAI produces lenses. So I got on the phone and I called every sheriff's office in the state of Indiana. Said, do you have a 4-to-1 Sony zoom lens camera? Yeah. I'll give you a 6-to-1 lens if you'll send me your 4-to-1. Who is this really? Ultimately, I was able to get a letter prepared on our letterhead, and I shipped, they shipped me the camera with the 4-to-1. I sent them back a brand new 6-to-1, and they were happy. We had the lenses. We tore them all down, calibrated them, put them back together. And as it turns out, 31 of the DSMACs that we built actually went out to IOC with used lenses on them. And they all survived shake and bake. So we were quite happy with that. The system operates day and night. How can it see at night? We put an image intensifier on there that was like the old photomultiplier tube, except that this device is about like this. You put voltages on these wires, and they're very high voltages, 5,000 and 6,000 volts, and you project an image onto this front surface. Inside, there are what are called microchannel plates. I'll ask you to just go look up image intensifiers and look up microchannel plate image intensifiers, and it will tell you how they work. But basically, if you put 1 foot candle on the front, well, 1/100th of a foot candle on the front, you'll get 2 or 3 foot candles out of the back, and it will be a perfect image back here. But like we saw in Desert Storm, it's green, because that's a green phosphor. But as it turned out, they worked. We discovered a lot of things that the company that manufactured them didn't know. We applied them in ways that they didn't think could be done, but ultimately it did. This is the high voltage power supply. Now, that's obviously not the power supply. This was a gift that when I left the program, my team had this made, and in there you have what's called a brickbat, because our program had brickbat priority, which was a top level priority. There's a Tomahawk in there, and there's a small Tomahawk cruise missile. In reality, this was the high voltage power supply. And we were making those, and of course we go through some really serious shake and bake, because you're going to carry these sometimes on aircraft at 60,000 feet, and it's going to be cold up there. So we found out that they were failing. They'd come back from shake and bake, and the high voltage power supply was faulty. We made some changes, came back faulty again. Finally, my team the morale was getting really low. They just couldn't get this to work right. I went to the Pentagon and said, send me the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty that we just signed with the Russians and Soviets. They did. I held a meeting and I passed them all out, and they asked, what are these? I said, this is what we, the United States, are going to do, because DSMAC is so accurate that we don't need nukes. What you're doing is important here. That got their attention, and ultimately we were able to do some what's called finite element analysis, where one of our engineers analyzed what happens during the vibration phase of one of these potted high voltage power supplies. As it turns out, the waves were propagating through that potting compound, and the circuits were a 1/4 inch off the surface so that the inspectors could see that they were good joints. Well, the waves of the potting compound were ripping the leads right out of the transistors. These were still discrete transistors. I told the inspector team, I said, you got to put the boards right down on the circuit, all the way down at the printed circuit board. He said, can't do that. Can't see the welds. I said, Jim, put them on the circuit. I can't do that. We can't do DSMAC. We can't do Tomahawk. If you tell me we can't do this, you want to go tell the captain that you're not going to do this and you're going to kill the program? We did it, and it worked. Now the shake and bake and the vibration, they passed, and we had a high voltage power supply that worked. I mentioned to Eleanor that on board the missile, besides the correlator or the DSMAC system, there is an illuminator. Nobody knows it. It's not classified. It's a flash camera, and this is the reflector. In the inside of that, there's a xenon tube with, I don't know, probably 20,000 volts that goes across it. Produces a flash. It produces enough light that the image intensifier will be able to see the ground at an altitude of 500 feet. So we installed that, and it's out there. But I wrote the classification guide for DSMAC. And I've talked to a number of people over the years, and we talk about the illuminator, and I said, what's that? I said, there's one on board. I never heard of that. I told her that I think a way to keep secrets is to not make them secret. Don't tell anybody that this is classified, and they won't even be interested in it. The illuminator is also manufactured by the same people who do the lens, Chicago Aerial Industries. We evaluated it down at West Texas Airport, flying a small open air aircraft on the ground and making light measurements with light meters, and it worked just fine. T-10, 1510 on August 10th, I think, 1980 was the first DSMAC flight. I had my team out at White Sands Missile Range ready. I took out some new team members who had not been there before. They launched the missile off the airplane and it right into the ground. And this is bad. Well, one of my team members, she was just devastated. I said, Lynn, these things happen. We'll go back and we'll do it again. It turned out the altitude sensor on the missile lied to the missile's engine and the wings. It thought it was at 12,000 feet when it was supposed to be at 6,000 feet. It flew from 12,000 feet down to 6,000, but it was at 6,000, so it drove right into the ground. Yep. But they fixed that, and all of the subsequent DSMAC flights were 100% successful, and they are still being used today. As I mentioned earlier, we're still sending a bunch of them over into Yemen and other places like that, and they have DSMACs on board. That's an actual DSMAC unit, number 105. The diameter of this entire base down here is essentially the diameter of the missile. So about 28 or 29 inches all the way around here. This one was flown, well, in fact, as we were flying these, the people at White Sands were tasked to go out and pick up the pieces after the missile crashed. The early flights, we popped them up and popped a parachute and just gently brought them back down. But since we wanted to do the real thing, now we didn't have a parachute, and they brought the missile down at 500 miles an hour, and it hit the ground. And things were just torn up, major. So the first four, they came back, and they finally said to us, do we really need to go out and pick up all this hardware? Because we wanted it picked up because it had top secret imagery in it. Well, we said, just do one more. And if it gets destroyed, then we'll be happy. We don't have to do it anymore. This is what came back to us. The only thing that was wrong is the lens cracked right here. We replaced that lens and one capacitor came free. We put the lens in and the capacitor and the unit worked just fine. We said, you will bring them back. And in fact, we used that one as what we called Lab Queen. We would use it at the plant to do testing with it. So they were, one interesting factor is the DSMAC system comes on at the end of the Tomahawk's flight. The Tomahawk cools itself by running the fuel through all of the electronics. So all this dimer fuel starts at submarine level, maybe 100 feet down. It's quite cold in there. And they use the fuel to keep the electronics happy. But with DSMAC, we don't get turned on until the last 4 or 5 minutes of the whole mission, and there's no fuel left. So it can't, it's not much fuel left, and we can't cool it that way. So what we did is we built it out of 1/4-inch aluminum plate and said, we'll store the heat in the aluminum plate because in 10 minutes, while it's beginning to get hot, it doesn't matter anymore. We're on the target. From January to June of 81, I did mission planning work at these sites, training them how to do missions. This is a demonstration of one of the shots we fired. This was a mock-up of a Soviet missile assembly building. We surveyed it and said, we're going to strike right square in the center. Some of the people at Point Magoo, or at I can't think, San Clemente Island, where this thing was, said, I don't know that you want to hit it right in the center because there's a vertical wall right square down the middle of this. And I said, oh, okay. And so if it hits that wall, it won't penetrate? He said, yeah. Shoot for the center, and let's hope we miss by a foot. Well, we did. And it went in just slightly to the right, and that's the result on that building. In 1984, the system was formally declared initial operational capability. My boss told me one evening as we were going out after we had reached IOC, and he said, Jim, you know, it generally takes about 14 years to go from initial concept to IOC. This one took 17. But it's still out there. And as I say, not bad for a system that a whole lot of people told us, this is never going to work. You guys are stupid. And it's still working. In Desert Storm, it was on board And we all remember seeing these pictures. This is a night vision goggle system. That's why it's so green. But Colin Powell came on after they made their initial attack, and he said, we fired 100 Tomahawks tonight, and 99 of them hit their target. And I said, yes. So it's still out there, and now it's been in the fleet since, what did I say this was? 1984. So we're at 41 years right now, and it's still going strong. Show me. Oh, I am going backward. Thank you. They're doing upgrades. We now have GPS on board. And so we got a system that uses inertial navigation, TERCOM, DSMAC, and GPS, and we get extremely accurate targeting without using a nuke. So 1,000-pound warhead, we are proud to say that we lowered the threshold or raised the threshold against nuclear war, and we hope that that stands. That's my team. Me at the end where we had a new logo designed. One of my artists down in our graphic arts area, they designed this logo for me. And there were, as I say, several thousand people nationwide that participated in this program. Everybody from NADC and people at the Cruise Missile Center in Washington, D.C., all the way out to Camp Smith in Hawaii. You don't know any of these people probably, but I thought, well, if I present this to my team, they should all be there. These organizations were part of it. And I did this presentation in Western New York recently, where I grew up, and I decided I needed to put some credit for my teachers who taught me some things. So these were my physics teacher, my math teachers, and the guy who taught me photography. This was written on the back of that power supply. Those who say it cannot be done should not interrupt those who are doing it. So thank you very much. Any questions?
Your DSMAC, it said it had a 8080 processor, and was there just one?
It was a single 8080 processor, and I don't know what is in it now because there's some image processing that is now being done rather than just using the black and white, making a negative. I know that we are now looking at both positives and negatives, and I suspect, well, I can tell you that it's not an 88 because, or 8088, because in 1980, probably, one of my people came over and said, yeah, we need to buy more 8088s because you can't buy them. What do you mean you can't buy them? They aren't making them anymore. We bought every 8088 that was available to buy, 12,000 of them. And we built a storage center in the plant to store them at low temperature so that we would not run out of them until we finally had a new processor. I'm sure there were, yeah. I don't know what was in the cruise missile guidance set computer. We just sent them a timestamp and a couple of values each time we got a fix. So I don't know how they were doing it.
I did have a question on chat.
Yes.
There was a question about where the test, you mentioned about white sands several times.
Yes.
We know about white sands, but what other locations was any testing done at?
The runway tests that I showed were at Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah, south and a little bit west of Salt Lake City. The first DSMAC flight in 1980 was flown at Tonopah Test Range, which is part of that place that doesn't exist, where Area 51 and all that is. When we went out to Tonopah, they flew us out in a DC-9 from Vegas that had no windows. All the windows were blocked up. And they said, we don't want you looking out. We landed, and the people who were the crew members said, now when you leave the plane, do not look left, do not look right, walk straight ahead and follow us into the door. So at that time, they were still testing the F-117s. And who knows what they were testing, and maybe they did. And I've worked with a guy who claims to have seen little green men out there. He didn't say they were green. He said they were gray and they had big heads.
One of the gentlemen online, Mike A, has a comment.
Okay.
You want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, this is Mike. Back in '86 or 1985, I went to Tactical Action Officer School in Dam Neck, and to some of the slides you showed, I remember going through the course on how to utilize Tomahawk. And in '87, '88, I did a short cruise on the USS Iowa that had the canister launchers for Tomahawk. And I'm truly amazed that this product, after 40 years, is such a significant part of Navy defense, national defense, and how well it works. It truly is a tribute to you. I mean, as a program manager I did for the Navy, how you drove and never took no for an answer and pushed to make the right decisions. It's truly a compliment to you and your team. Just like the quote said, you just don't bother those people trying to make it work. So congratulations to you.
Thank you very much. When we were doing this, I mentioned to Eleanor earlier that my wife and I, she also worked at Naval Avionics Center as the SSO. I only know a portion of what she did because she couldn't tell me the other things she did. But one Sunday evening, we were watching 60 Minutes at home, and all of a sudden, here comes this piece of video that was the fin camera on T-10-3. And I said, Carol, look at this. It's going to turn right now. Now, whoop. And I said, cool. Well, later, I got information that I can't prove that this is true, but the information leads me to believe that the government did not think we could do this. They were telling the Soviets, they were telling the rest of the world that we had this Tomahawk, but my sense is that they didn't think that DSMAC was going to work. And when it did, they said, they really did it? You mean they've got this thing? Because they were planning on giving it up as a bargaining chip. Well, they gave up the nukes because they didn't need them, but they kept the DSMAC as it is. We use it all the time.
I do have another question from chat. Is the renewed interest in this technology in the current GPS jammed battle environment?
I would say yes, but there won't be any jamming of the DSMAC because it's just taking pictures, and it does have EMP protection, so you're not going to get through into it. And you got to know where the scenes were in the first place in order to do any kind of jamming. You could go out there and plow the scenes completely clear, and that would stop it from working. But you don't know that because that's being done in the mission planning centers. The GPS can be jammed, and that's current knowledge that the Soviets can go up there. In fact, it's been indicated that they have technology to go up there and take down a number of GPS satellites. They're at 22,000 miles up. Well, no, that's not true. They're at 12,900, the GPS birds are, but they have the capability of going up there and taking out a string of them.
Question from the
Navigation or inertial nav capability being looked at, or
Electromagnetic? You mean there is work going on with that. In fact, where I currently work, the question was, is there any work on navigation relative to the Earth's geomagnetic field? There have been investigations of that, and we received a proposal that I believe we at Wolf Technical Services submitted a proposal to work on that case. Personally, I don't think it's going to really work well because the magnetic field these days is changing quite rapidly. We used to have to update the navigation maps, the magnetic maps, every 5 years because the declination had been changing at that rate. Now it's every 3 years. So depending on the accuracy you're looking for, you might not be able to achieve that. But I will say that if you don't need real high accuracy, for example, if you're attacking some place that is flatter than this floor and you don't have any intercom, then the magnetic fields might be useful because they'll have sufficient resolution to get you close.
I'm going to take one last question from chat, then we're going to have to wrap up because we are running long this evening. What weather criteria needs to be met for the system to work? Visibility, precipitation, etc.
Basically, you need to be able to see the ground. And initially, we were concerned about snow, but on the Tomahawk flight at Dugway or at Tonopah, it snowed that morning. They told us that it never snows in northern Nevada. Well, it snowed that morning when we fired that. And some of the people who were out on the range said there's snow all over the ground, but it's melting. And I looked at my boss and I said, shoot it, John, it'll go. He said, what do you mean? I said, it's melting where the bushes are. They're going to be wet soil. They'll be even darker than they were before. Everything in between will be light colored because it was light sand or dirt before, and now it'll be a brand new white. We ended up with close to 100% correlation on that shot. But can heavy weather, tornadoes, deep weather be a problem? I don't want to get too far into that, but remember that this is an image intensifier and it is capable of seeing in areas of 0.002 foot candles from an elevation of 500 feet or greater.
Great, thank you. Build our equipment. I did have one request. I know that obviously the people online could not see the show and tell very clearly.
Right.
So I want to talk to you about maybe getting some photographs and things that I could send as follow-up.
I can certainly do that, and I can embed them into the file for you. None of these are classified. It's
But I think it'd be nice, even though we did have some images in the slides, it'd be nice to supplement them. So,
Yep.
All right, awesome. All right, well, thank you everybody for your patience this evening. I know we're running long. We are on webinar only the next 2 months. So just to let you know, but we will be doing a live program here in August. So again, Jim, fantastic presentation.
thank you.
Love all the detail and love all the personal stories about, all the trial and error it took to finally persist and have this thing operating for over 40 years. So thank you again, and I'm going to call it a wrap.
Thank you.